In the winter of 1823, when frost hardened the English countryside into silver and stone, few names inspired more fear than that of Duke Cassian Ravenshire. People spoke of him in whispers at candlelit dinners and crowded markets alike. Some called him heartless. Others called him cursed. No one called him happy. Ravenshire Castle stood on a cliff overlooking the North Sea, its black towers rising above the crashing waves like a monument to grief itself. For nearly 2 centuries, the Ravenshire family had ruled their lands with wealth, power, and an almost supernatural devotion to preserving their bloodline. Yet by the autumn of Cassian's 30th year, the dynasty faced extinction. Hundreds of miles away, Lady Elara Whitmore sat beside the dying fire in her father's estate and listened as her future disappeared. "The creditors will arrive by Christmas," her father said quietly. The room smelled of old books and damp wood. Once, the Whitmores had been respected members of England's nobility. Now the wallpaper peeled from the walls, the servants had long since departed, and every remaining possession carried a price tag invisible to everyone except Elara. She lowered her eyes to the letter resting in her hands. A marriage proposal. Not from a gentleman seeking affection. Not from a man seeking companionship. From the Duke of Ravenshire. "I can refuse," she whispered. Her father looked away. That silence told her everything. 3 weeks later, beneath the towering arches of St. Bartholomew's Cathedral, Elara Whitmore became the Duchess of Ravenshire. Snow drifted outside the stained-glass windows while England's aristocracy watched the ceremony with barely concealed fascination. Elara wore ivory silk trimmed with lace her family could not afford. Beside her stood the man who had purchased her future. Cassian Ravenshire was taller than she had imagined, dressed entirely in black. His dark hair framed a face carved by hardship rather than age. He did not look cruel. He looked exhausted. The bishop recited the vows. Elara spoke every word. Cassian never once turned toward her. When the ceremony ended, applause echoed through the cathedral. Elara felt as though she had just attended her own funeral. The journey to Ravenshire Castle lasted 2 days. Cassian spent nearly the entire carriage ride staring through the window at the frozen countryside. He asked whether she was comfortable. He ensured she ate. He offered her blankets when temperatures fell. He never asked how she felt. By the time the castle emerged from the sea mist, twilight had consumed the horizon. Elara understood immediately why local villagers feared the place. The fortress rose directly from the cliffs, surrounded by iron gates and ancient stone walls. Hundreds of windows glowed against the darkness, yet the castle itself felt strangely lifeless. As servants welcomed them inside, Elara noticed something peculiar. Locks. Heavy iron locks secured corridors, stairwells, and doors throughout the estate. She said nothing. That evening, after a dinner conducted almost entirely in silence, Cassian escorted her to a private study. A fire burned low in the hearth. On the desk sat a leather-bound document. Cassian remained standing. "There is something you should read," he said. Elara opened the document slowly. It was a contract. Her eyes scanned the pages. Financial guarantees. Inheritance clauses. Property transfers. One sentence froze her blood. "Upon the successful birth of a legitimate heir, Her Grace shall receive independent wealth sufficient to guarantee permanent security and freedom." She looked up. "You expect me to sign this?" "I expect honesty," Cassian replied. "Is that what this marriage is?" His expression never changed. "This marriage is an agreement." The room suddenly felt smaller. "And if I refuse?" "You may leave tomorrow with enough money to support your family." For the first time since meeting him, Elara saw something flicker behind his eyes. Not anger. Not cruelty. Relief. He wanted her to leave. She signed. Cassian nodded once. "Thank you." Then he walked away. The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm. Elara learned the castle's routines, its servants, and its silences. She discovered entire wings that remained permanently locked. She learned that the Duke rarely slept more than a few hours each night. She discovered that despite his reputation, no servant feared him. They pitied him. Whenever she asked why, conversations ended. Winter deepened. Snow buried the gardens. The sea crashed endlessly below the cliffs. And slowly, against all reason, Elara began noticing the spaces between Cassian's coldness. He ensured fresh flowers appeared in her chambers every morning, though he never delivered them himself. He ordered physicians to visit after learning she disliked the castle's food. He listened whenever she spoke, even if he rarely answered. Then came the storm. It arrived after midnight. Thunder shook the castle walls while rain lashed the windows hard enough to sound like gunfire. Elara awoke disoriented and frightened. The corridors beyond her room seemed endless. Without thinking, she stepped outside. She found Cassian standing alone on a balcony overlooking the sea. Lightning illuminated his face. He looked terrified. Another crack of thunder split the sky. Elara flinched. Without hesitation, Cassian removed his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The gesture lasted only seconds. Then he stepped back as though regretting it. "You should return inside," he said quietly. She studied him. "Do storms frighten you?" For a long moment he did not answer. Finally, without looking at her, he spoke. "Storms take everything." The next morning he avoided her entirely. Weeks passed. The snow began to melt. Spring approached. Then, one gray morning in March, Elara sat beside her bedroom window while the family physician completed his examination. The elderly man smiled gently. "Congratulations, Your Grace," he said. "You are carrying the Duke's child." For the first time since arriving at Ravenshire Castle, Elara forgot to breathe. Outside, somewhere deep within the castle, a door slammed shut. Elara pressed a trembling hand against her abdomen and realized that nothing inside Ravenshire would ever remain the same again, including the man she married. The news of Elara's pregnancy reached Duke Cassian Ravenshire before sunset. No servant ever discovered who informed him first. Some believed it was the physician. Others claimed Cassian had already sensed the change in her before anyone else had spoken the words aloud. Whatever the truth, by the time Elara emerged from her chambers that evening, Ravenshire Castle had transformed. Additional guards stood at every entrance. The gates overlooking the sea remained locked. Servants spoke in hushed voices. And for the first time since their marriage, Cassian was waiting for her. He stood beside the grand staircase, dressed not for dinner but for riding, as though he had been prepared to cross England itself if necessary. When Elara descended the final step, he looked directly at her. "Are you well?" he asked. The question should not have felt extraordinary. Yet somehow it did. "I believe so," she answered carefully. He nodded once. "The physician will return tomorrow." "He already examined me." "He will return anyway." There was no anger in his voice. No command. Only a strange urgency that unsettled her more than cruelty ever could. Over the following weeks, that urgency spread through every corner of Ravenshire. Physicians arrived twice each week. The kitchens prepared meals according to medical instructions. The horses were forbidden from being saddled for Elara's use. When she asked to visit the village chapel, Cassian refused. When she requested permission to write to distant relatives, he assigned a courier himself. The walls of Ravenshire had not physically moved. Yet somehow they had become narrower. At first, Elara tried to understand. She observed the way Cassian watched her during meals, believing she would not notice. She saw how his eyes followed every step she took on staircases. Twice she awoke during the night to discover extra firewood had been placed in her chambers after temperatures dropped unexpectedly. He never admitted responsibility. He simply continued watching. Then came the doctor's visit in early May. Rain tapped softly against the windows while Elara sat beside the fireplace and endured another examination. Cassian remained near the door, silent and motionless. The physician smiled. "The child is healthy." Cassian did not react. "The pregnancy progresses perfectly." Still he remained silent. Then the elderly doctor placed Elara's hand against her abdomen and spoke quietly. "Your Grace, the baby has a strong heartbeat." Something changed. Cassian crossed the room. His movements were slow, almost hesitant. "May I?" he asked. The question startled Elara more than his presence. She nodded. When the physician guided Cassian's hand, silence filled the room. Seconds passed. Then another. Elara watched the color drain from his face. His fingers trembled. Not from weakness. From fear. A single heartbeat. A life he could neither command nor protect. When he finally stepped away, he thanked the physician twice. That night, Elara heard him walking the corridors until dawn. As spring surrendered to summer, Cassian's concern deepened into something far more dangerous. The estate gates remained closed permanently. Several servants were dismissed without explanation. Visitors stopped arriving. Ravenshire Castle became an island surrounded not by water, but by Cassian's growing terror. And yet, beneath that fear, Elara began discovering evidence of something else. One afternoon, while searching for embroidery thread, she unlocked a forgotten door at the end of the eastern corridor. Beyond it lay a small room bathed in sunlight. A nursery. She stood motionless. Tiny wooden animals rested on shelves. A cradle occupied the center of the room. Stars had been painted carefully across the ceiling. Nothing resembled the work of servants. Everything resembled love. She picked up a carved wooden bird. Its wings were imperfect. And made. Behind her, a voice spoke quietly. I was going to show you when it was finished. Cassian stood in the doorway. For once, he did not appear like a duke. He looked like a frightened man caught revealing his heart. You made these? Elara asked. He nodded. Why? He looked toward the cradle. Because no one made them for me. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Cassian turned and walked away before she could answer. Weeks later, at the king's summer reception in London, Elara finally saw what frightened him. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and political ambition. Nobles crowded around the Duke of Ravenshire, seeking alliances and favors. Elara smiled when required. She danced once. Then the room tilted. The music blurred. Before she could fall, Cassian reached her. He ignored the shocked aristocrats. Ignored the royal advisor speaking beside him. Ignored everything except her. He carried her from the ballroom himself. Later, in their carriage, she found him staring at his hands. I thought you died, he whispered. The words haunted her. That night, back at Ravenshire, Elara awoke to a sound she had never heard before. Crying. She followed it through dark corridors until she reached Cassian's study. The door remained slightly open. Inside, he slept in a chair beside the fire. And through broken breaths, he whispered words that froze her blood. Mother, please don't leave me. Please don't go. The next morning, he behaved as though nothing had happened. But Elara could no longer ignore what she had witnessed. The fear. The locks. The desperation. She began searching. 3 days later, inside a sealed cabinet hidden behind bookshelves in the Western Library, she discovered a collection of journals. The handwriting belonged to Lady Isabella Ravenshire, Cassian's mother. Elara read until sunrise. Page after page described isolation, locked doors, forbidden journeys, a husband whose love had become imprisonment. Then she reached the final entry. The ink had smeared as though written through tears. I must escape before my son learns that love and captivity are the same thing. She realized that fear, inherited and unhealed, could transform devotion into the most intimate form of imprisonment without either person noticing. As dawn illuminated the room, Elara closed the journal with shaking hands. For the first time since arriving at Ravenshire Castle, she became truly afraid of her husband. In the days following her discovery of Lady Isabella's journals, Elara Whitmore ceased trying to understand her husband. Understanding had become too dangerous. Every kindness Cassian offered now carried the shadow of the words she had read. Every locked door echoed with the voice of a woman long dead. Every expression of concern felt less like love and more like possession disguised as devotion. She began planning her escape. She told no one. Not the servants who had grown fond of her. Not the physician who praised the child's strength. Certainly not the man who watched her with increasing desperation every day. Outside, summer surrendered to autumn. Inside Ravenshire Castle, fear matured quietly. Cassian sensed the distance growing between them. Elara saw it in the way his eyes lingered when she left a room and in the questions he asked that disguised themselves as concern. Had she slept well? Was the baby moving? Did she need anything? What he truly wanted to ask was far simpler. Are you leaving me? He never asked. Perhaps he feared the answer. By October, Elara was 8 months pregnant. The storms returned. Wind battered the cliffs surrounding Ravenshire, and the sea below became a graveyard of white waves and darkness. The servants crossed themselves whenever thunder rolled across the sky. Elara chose the worst night of the year. She waited until midnight. She waited until the household slept. She waited until lightning illuminated the windows so brightly that the castle itself seemed to disappear between flashes. Then she put on her cloak, placed one hand over her unborn child, and walked toward the forgotten servant tunnels described in Lady Isabella's final journal. She did not leave because she hated Cassian. That was the tragedy. She left because she believed he loved her in exactly the wrong way. The tunnel entrance lay beneath the old kitchens. The air smelled of stone, salt, and centuries of silence. Elara carried only a lantern and the conviction that if she remained at Ravenshire, she would lose herself forever. The passage stretched beneath the cliffs. Water dripped from the ceiling. The child shifted inside her. Just a little farther, she whispered. Above her, thunder shattered the night. At almost the exact same moment, Cassian awoke. Later he would never remember why. Perhaps the storm had disturbed him. Perhaps some ancient fear buried inside him had finally found a voice. He rose from bed and walked to Elara's chambers. The room was empty. For one terrible second he simply stared. Then the world ended. Servants woke to shouting. Guards ran through corridors. Candles flared to life throughout Ravenshire Castle. No one had ever seen the Duke afraid. Now they watched him become a man unraveling before their eyes. Find her. The order emerged as a whisper. Moments later, it became a scream. Find her. They searched the grounds, the gardens, the stables, the cliffs. Nothing. Then an elderly servant remembered the sealed tunnels. Cassian did not wait for explanations. He rode into the storm. Rain struck his face like shattered glass. The wind threatened to throw horse and rider into the sea. Still he rode. As a child, he had watched men search through another storm. He had stood beside a window while servants carried lanterns into the darkness. He had heard his father shouting his mother's name. He had believed she would come home. She never did. Now history was happening again. Only this time he understood the terror. Hours passed. The storm intensified. Miles from Ravenshire, Elara emerged from the tunnel entrance into chaos. The road ahead had flooded. Trees bent beneath violent winds. Pain gripped her abdomen. Not labor. Not yet. Fear. She kept walking. She thought of freedom. She thought of her child. She thought of the journals hidden in the library. Then she heard it. A voice. Faint. Distant. Calling her name. She turned. Through sheets of rain and darkness, a rider appeared. Cassian. He reached her just as her strength failed. She collapsed before he could dismount. When she opened her eyes again, she was lying beneath the remains of an old stone bridge while rain thundered overhead. Cassian knelt beside her. His face was covered in mud and rainwater. Or perhaps tears. You could have died, he said. You would have kept me here forever, she answered. The words struck him harder than the storm. I was protecting you. No, she whispered. You were protecting yourself. Lightning illuminated the river below. I read your mother's journals. He closed his eyes. Everything changed. You think I imprisoned you because I wanted power? He asked. You locked every door. Because I was afraid. She looked at him. Not at the Duke. Not at the man England feared. At the child who had once watched his mother disappear into a storm. I don't love the air, he said, his voice breaking. I love you. And I cannot survive losing you. For a long moment, neither moved. The storm raged around them. The river swelled. The world held its breath. Then Elara understood something even more frightening than captivity. He was telling the truth. Cassian did not answer. He stood motionless in the courtyard as servants lowered the final iron bar across the gates. The sound echoed through Ravenshire like a funeral bell. For the first time since childhood, he understood what his father must have felt after losing Isabella. Not anger, not authority, but helplessness so profound that it disguised itself as control. Above them, the storm clouds began to break. Yet neither noticed the solitary rider watching Ravenshire Castle from distant hills. And neither knew that their greatest danger had never been inside the gates at all. You didn't imprison me, Cassian. You imprisoned yourself. 3 days passed after the storm. No one spoke about the confrontation beneath the bridge. Elara remained inside her chambers overlooking the sea. Cassian remained everywhere else. The servants moved through Ravenshire Castle with the careful silence of people living inside a wound. The gates stayed locked. Yet something had changed. Cassian no longer stationed guards outside Elara's rooms. He no longer questioned where she walked inside the castle. Twice, she found letters beneath her door written in his careful hand and never signed. The first contained only 3 words. I was afraid. The second contained 4. I'm still afraid. She never answered either. Autumn deepened. The wind sharpened. And throughout Ravenshire, an invisible tension coiled tighter each day. It broke on the evening Lord Nathaniel Ashcroft arrived. Elara knew Nathaniel only as Cassian's cousin and the closest surviving male relative to the Ravenshire line. He was handsome, articulate, and possessed the effortless charm that Cassian had never learned to imitate. When he entered the drawing room, he bowed with impeccable courtesy. Your Grace, he said warmly, I have long wished to meet the woman who accomplished the impossible. Elara frowned. And what impossible thing was that? Nathaniel smiled. You taught Cassian to fear losing someone again. For the first time since the bridge, Elara saw genuine alarm cross Cassian's face. Leave us, he said. Nathaniel's smile widened. Perhaps it is time we stopped leaving things unsaid. The storm outside intensified. Rain battered the windows. And then Nathaniel began speaking. He spoke of inheritance, of bloodlines, of a family fortune built on obsession and secrecy. Finally, he spoke of Isabella Ravenshire. "I knew your mother," he told Cassian quietly. "Better than you ever realized." The room fell silent. Cassian stepped forward. "What did you say?" Nathaniel's expression remained calm. "I told her the doors would always remain locked. I told her your father intended to keep her imprisoned forever." Elara felt the world shift beneath her feet. "No," Cassian whispered. "She trusted me," Nathaniel continued. "She believed every word." The truth arrived not as an explosion but as a collapse. The journals, the fear, the escape, the death, all of it had been manipulated. "Why?" Elara asked. For the first time, Nathaniel's mask disappeared. "Because everything in this family belonged to Cassian," he said. "The title, the land, the future. I spent my life waiting for tragedy to correct that injustice." Lightning illuminated his face. "When Isabella died, I became heir." He looked toward Elara's stomach. "And if something unfortunate happened again, I would become one once more." Cassian lunged. Servants screamed. Furniture crashed. But Nathaniel had already moved. He overturned the oil lamp. The world became fire. Flames erupted across the carpet and climbed the curtains with terrifying speed. Within seconds, smoke consumed the room. Nathaniel disappeared into the chaos. "Run!" Cassian shouted. He seized Elara's hand and pulled her into the corridor. Behind them, Ravenshire Castle began to burn. The fire spread as though it had been waiting for permission. Generations of paintings vanished beneath flames. Ancient beams cracked overhead. Servants fled through smoke-filled hallways carrying children and whatever pieces of their lives they could save. Cassian never released Elara's hand. They descended one staircase, then another. Halfway through the great hall, the ceiling collapsed. The impact threw them apart. For one terrible moment, Elara saw nothing except fire. Then she heard him. "Elara." She answered. He found her. He always found her. He lifted her into his arms and continued running. Outside, the night had become a nightmare of fire and snow. Snow. Elara stared upward. White flakes fell through black smoke. Winter had arrived. Then pain tore through her body. She cried out. Cassian stopped moving. The expression on his face frightened her more than the fire. "The baby," she whispered. "No, not now." But the child had made its decision. Labor had begun. The estate chapel stood a quarter-mile from the burning castle. Cassian carried her there himself. Behind them, Ravenshire collapsed. Inside the chapel, candles flickered against ancient stone. The midwife arrived moments later. The storm worsened. Hours passed. Elara screamed. Cassian held her hand through every contraction. At some point he began crying. "I am sorry," he whispered. She could barely breathe. "For what?" "For loving you like a prison." The truth of the confession broke something open between them. He had never wanted control. He had wanted certainty. He had mistaken possession for protection because he had never witnessed love survive loss. Before the birth, there was a moment when Elara believed neither would survive the night. The pain blurred time. The storm shook the chapel doors. Somewhere beyond the walls, the last remnants of the Ravenshire legacy were turning to ash. She looked at Cassian and saw, finally, the man hidden beneath the title. Not the feared Duke. Not the jailer she had imagined. A frightened boy who had watched love disappear and spent the rest of his life trying to prevent that pain from returning. "If I die," she whispered, "you must let her be free." He shook his head violently. "Do not ask me to survive that. Promise me." He lowered his forehead to her hand. "I promise her freedom," he said, "but I cannot promise I will survive losing you." For the first time since their marriage, Elara truly squeezed his hand not from fear, but from understanding. Another wave of pain struck. "I spent my life building walls," he said, tears falling freely now. "But loving you was the first time I ever truly lived." The chapel fell silent. Then came the sound. A cry. Small. Fragile. Alive. The child had arrived. Dawn broke slowly over the ruined estate. The fire had consumed Ravenshire Castle entirely. Nothing remained except smoke, ash, and memory. The midwife placed the infant into Elara's arms. A daughter. Cassian stared at the child as though seeing hope for the first time. Outside, the final tower of Ravenshire collapsed into flames. The fire that destroyed Ravenshire Castle burned for 3 days. When the smoke finally cleared, nothing remained except blackened stone, collapsed towers, and the ghosts of a family history that had consumed itself. The newspapers called it a tragedy. The aristocracy called it the end of an era. Cassian Ravenshire called it justice. He stood beside the ruins on the fourth morning after the fire, watching workers search through ashes that had once been his inheritance. The sea continued crashing against the cliffs exactly as it had for centuries, indifferent to human suffering. Elara found him there. Their daughter slept in her arms. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Cassian stared at the ruins for a long time. "Now," he said, "nothing belongs to Ravenshire anymore." For the first time since their marriage, Elara did not hear grief in his voice. She heard freedom. The following months confused all of England. Instead of rebuilding the estate, Cassian sold it. Instead of restoring the family fortune, he dismantled it. He sold hunting grounds, properties, investments, and land that had belonged to the Ravenshire family for generations. Newspapers speculated that grief had driven him insane. Politicians attempted to intervene. Distant relatives protested publicly. Cassian ignored them all. He spent every day with Elara and Aurora. Not as a duke, as a father. He learned how to hold his daughter when she cried. He walked with Elara through coastal villages where nobody recognized them. He laughed for the first time in years when Aurora grabbed his finger and refused to release it. And because happiness frightened him more than tragedy ever had, he knew it could not last. One evening in early spring, he sat alone in the small cottage they had rented near the sea. Aurora slept upstairs. Elara had fallen asleep beside the fire. Cassian watched them both. Then he understood. He loved them enough to let them choose a life without him. The realization nearly destroyed him. The next morning he requested that Elara accompany him to London. She agreed. The journey was silent. By sunset they stood before a large estate overlooking the Thames. Unlike Ravenshire, it possessed no gates, no walls, and no towers. Women and children filled its gardens. Some laughed. Some cried. Some simply sat in the sunlight as though they had never expected to see it again. "What is this?" Elara asked. Cassian looked at the building. "The house of Aurora." She turned toward him. He continued speaking. "I sold everything." The words landed softly. "The estates, the lands, the inheritance." "Why?" "Because I spent my life protecting walls instead of people." He handed her a stack of legal documents. She stared at them. Ownership transfers, financial trusts, guardianship rights. Her name appeared on every page. "You own this place," he said. She looked up. "And you?" He smiled. For the first time since she had known him, the smile contained no fear. "I wanted to leave behind something that protects freedom instead of taking it away." Over the following year, England forgot the Duke of Ravenshire. But it remembered the House of Aurora. Women fleeing violent marriages found refuge there. Children who had lost everything found homes. Elara managed the sanctuary with a strength she had never known she possessed. She became something she had never been allowed to become before. Herself. And throughout that entire year, Cassian never returned. At first she hated him for leaving. Then she understood why he had done it. Because he had finally learned the lesson his father never had. Love offered without freedom was merely another prison. Still, understanding did not make absence easier. Sometimes, late at night, she found herself remembering small things. The way he held Aurora. The way he stood beside windows during storms. The way he had looked at her in the chapel while believing she would die. She never wrote to him. Neither did he write to her. A full year passed. Winter returned. The city hosted its annual festival on the riverfront, and Elara attended only because Aurora, now walking and laughing and endlessly curious, had become fascinated by lanterns. Snow drifted softly through the evening air. Music filled the streets. Families crowded around market stalls. Then Aurora stopped walking. The child pointed. "Mama." Elara followed her gaze, and forgot how to breathe. Cassian stood at the edge of the square. He wore no noble clothing. No title. No symbol of the man he had once been. He was kneeling beside 3 orphan children, helping them build a snow lantern. He looked happy. Not the happiness of victory. Not the happiness of power. The fragile happiness of a man who had learned to live with regret. As though sensing her presence, he looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither moved. Then Aurora ran toward him. Cassian froze. The little girl threw herself into his arms. He held her as though holding the entire world. When he finally looked at Elara again, tears had already filled his eyes. "I didn't expect to see you," he said. "I know." Snow settled across his shoulders. Aurora laughed and touched his face. The sight nearly broke her. "Why didn't you come back?" she asked. He looked away. Because some questions deserved honesty. Because I loved you. The answer stunned her. He continued. I spent my entire life taking away choices from people I feared losing. His voice trembled. When I left, it was the first decision I ever made that wasn't about my own fear. The festival continued around them. No one noticed the silence that had formed between them. I wanted you to choose your life, he whispered. Even if that life didn't include me. She realized then that he had not abandoned her. He had finally respected her. And somehow that hurt more than abandonment ever could. She reached into her coat pocket. He frowned. She withdrew a small iron key. What is that? He asked. She smiled through tears. 6 months ago I bought a house. He stared at her. A small estate by the sea. His expression broke. Elara. It has no gates. He laughed despite himself. No locked doors. No locked doors. The wind carried snow around them. Aurora reached for both of their hands. For the first time since the fire, neither pulled away. Then Elara placed the key into his palm. Not because she belonged to him. Not because he had earned forgiveness. But because they had both survived becoming the people they feared most. And because love, when finally freed from fear, could become something neither prison nor tragedy had ever allowed it to be. Oh. Would you like to come home, Cassian? For the first time in his life, the Duke of Ravenshire understood that the most beautiful freedom in the world was being asked to stay. And this time he answered yes.